Okay, so I wasn't planning this video, but I think it's an interesting subject. Just interesting from the point of view that it counters a narrative that's been spun for quite from some segments of social commentary last year, and I just think it's worth looking at. And the headline is Female Leaders Found to Be No Better in Crisis. Feminists won't like this. Reports by Reese Blakely of the Times, science correspondent. So I'll just read out a few paragraphs. Germany, under its female leader Angela Merkel, has a lower COVID-19 death rate than Boris Johnson's Britain, a report points out. Finland, where the Prime Minister Sanna Marin heads a coalition of four parties led by women, has outperformed Sweden, which has a male leader. Taiwan's female leader Tsai Ing-wen has kept its coronavirus deaths to just seven. Faced with these statistics, some observers have argued that in the pandemic it seems to be it pays to have a woman in charge. Yet analysis suggests that if you take into account all of the countries with female leaders, rather than cherry pick the best in the richest countries, their advantage over men melts away. And this was something I'd long suspected and I'd argued. I'm not suggesting I've done a study on this, but you just need to have a basic look at the reported figures on coronavirus. For example, this is the big crisis of the day, and whether countries have male or female prime ministers or presidents. Um, so the problem is, though, I think those sort of reports were being pushed by feminists and progressives just to tie into their narrative that women are better. Basically, there's no other way to look at it. That's what they argued. Um, so the report continues. Um, Nations with larger numbers of women in their governing assemblies have tended to do worse in terms of COVID-19 deaths per capita, though they often hold only nominal power. Researchers looked at 175 countries. Only 16 had a woman in charge, defined as having executive authority and command of the military. Comparisons took into account factors such as cultural characteristics, whether countries were democracies or dictatorships, and assessments of how prepared they had been for disaster. Overall, states with female leaders did better in terms of death rates, but the difference was not significant, suggesting this could have been chance. Leah Windsor of Memphis University, who led the study, said a country's cultural values were far better predictor of how it would fare in a pandemic. The study found societies that were more egalitarian, more collectivist, and more indulgent, a term that factors in things such as having a better work-life balance and happier outlook, tended to have fewer deaths per capita. Bear in mind, well, actually, it's going to mention this. The main point of the work, published in the journal PLOS1, was to scrutinise whether the performance of female leaders such as Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who has been widely applauded for her management of the pandemic, spitting image paraded her as a Mary Poppins type figure, were part of a broader pattern. It has been suggested that female leaders share similar qualities, good listening skills, an inclination to seek input and counsel for important decisions, and an ability to see the big picture and proficiency in risk management. The researchers concluded that mediocre women leaders and very good male ones had largely been ignored. Um, Early in the pandemic, Belgium, then led by Sophie Wilmès, had a large number of deaths relative to its population, one of the worst in the world, by the way. Vietnam, led by Nguyen Phu Trong, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a man, has 97 million people on the border with China, fewer than 40 deaths. I mean, Vietnam has one of the, assuming that is the Communist Party of Vietnam telling the truth about their death figures, it has one of the lowest rates in the world proportion to its size. The study said the view that women have been better leaders is based on selective reporting of cases where women have succeeded and are focused on relatively rich countries. In other words, it's selective. It doesn't show the whole picture. Um, but try telling a feminist that, and they'll say, "Oh, you're trying to undermine female power." It's selective. They want to put out that narrative, or they'll endorse reports as they see it. Just because it ties into their way of thinking. I've heard progressives, including men, say, "Oh, if only the world was led by women, there'd be no problems." Really? Um, there's many examples in history of tyrannical women, and of course, there's far more tyrannical men. I get that, but it's basically, to me, it's the epitome of sexism that all women are good and all men are bad. And, these feminists who push that, they'll deny it, but that's basically what they're saying. Um, there are good male leaders and lousy female leaders. And I don't think it's because they're men and because they're women. I think it's down to the individual values of a particular leader. Cultural factors come into that too. I agree with that. Whether a society is more prone to accepting democracy or whether it's a dictatorship. There's a lot of factors at play. Um, most world leaders are men. So it's very easy to look at countries like the United States and Brazil, which are led by very blowhard right wing men, Trump and Bolsonaro, and they've had very high death rates. India, you can include with that Narendra Modi, Boris Johnson in the UK, although I wouldn't compare Johnson's personality to Trump or Bolsonaro. But look at Belgium. It's a small country, 10 million people, and it's had a very high death rate in proportion to other countries of a similar size. But those who push this, I remember when this was raised, I said sort of similar things that I've said here, and a male feminist had a go at me. He said, "I just don't like the idea of women in power." It's got nothing to do with that. There are strong women out there, but there's also mediocre and lousy women leaders. Feminists need to stop being so divisive and constantly seeing everything through the prism of um, black and white when it comes to men and women. And I do say feminists because they will absolutely endorse this idea. Um, some feminists might disagree and say, well, no, it's down to individuals, but that's the point. Feminism is the women-centric movement, therefore the narrative women are better leaders is of course is going to be popular with them. But that's interesting, and it just you know kind of doesn't surprise me because of course if you truly look at the worldwide scale, it isn't that black and white. Um, the reports, although I'm a little confused by this because it says that the report concludes that mediocre women and effective men were ignored. So I don't know if that's the same report. I guess it's just looking at different reports. Anyway, interesting stuff. So, in conclusion, no, you can't just say women are better because they are women. It's it's a fundamentally sexist argument. And okay, I get that they're talking about certain characteristic traits that may be more found in women, but it's still a generalization. And generalizations by definition are based on stereotypes and one size fits all, which of course isn't the reality. I mean, put it this way, if Theresa May was still Prime Minister, would she have handled this any better than Boris? I'm not convinced that she would. And that's not a swipe at Theresa May. I just don't think that there's any evidence that that would be the case.